gifted Jewish writer and recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, tells a story of his childhood. When he was a boy, his mother would greet him every day when he came home from school. Every day, she asked him the same question. She did not ask, "What did you do today?" She did not ask, "Who did you talk to today?" She didn't even ask, "What did you learn today?" Every day she would ask, "Did you have a good question today?" After a week in which tragedy has once again rocked our nation, and after the tragedy of the Paris attacks, and after nearly a year since the Charlie Hebdo attacks, once again we are asking questions. Some of the questions are to be expected. Why would two people drop off their 6-month-old daughter and go to kill and be killed? What makes people think this way? How did they amass such a stockpile of weapons and ammunition and bombs? What could have been done to prevent it or stop it? There are lots of questions being asked and debated. Other questions are not being asked. What precipitated the current violence? Why are some people moved to lash out with unspeakable violence? What course of actions could include the responses we are seeing today? Sometimes we get caught up in the smaller questions and fail to ask the larger questions. The prophet Malachi asks good questions, not only for his day, but for ours. In the course of just 55 verses, Malachi asks 22 questions. Have we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? You bring what has been taken by violence, or is lame or sick, and this you bring as your offering. Shall I accept that from your hand, says the Lord? But who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? Question upon question upon question. Through his questions, Malachi calls the people to a season of self-examination. Malachi's questions force us to consider our words, our actions, and how we have lived as God's people. Little wonder this passage is included in our Advent lectionary. Advent is a season of self-examination and introspection. Advent calls each of us to consider how we have lived, how we are living, and how God calls us to live. The Advent themes of justice and righteousness are directly related to such self-examination. The Advent question is ever before us. Are we ready to stand face to face with God? Malachi tells us that God is sending us a messenger. The details of the messenger are not given. It may have been a priest or a prophet, but the messenger's task is clear. The messenger comes to clean and refine and purify the people of God. I confess a certain prejudice to the description of the messenger being like fuller's soap. Throughout the early years of my life, my father was a fuller brush man. Now, some of you are too young to even know what that was. The Fuller Brush Company had a line of home cleaning products and exceptional hairbrushes that were sold door to door by Fuller Brush men. When I hear the words Fuller's soap, it always brings up memories. But if you go back and do a little research, a fuller was someone who cleaned the wools and other materials that would be woven into cloth. In Scotland, they were called walkers, W-A-U-L-K-E-R. A fuller's job was to remove the impurities that would keep the cloth that was to be woven from being anything less than what it could be. In the same way, a refiner's job was to melt the metals and remove the dross, the impurities that would float to the top. This time of year, you soup makers understand this process as you take what we lovingly call the scum off the top of the soup pot. The work of cleaning and purifying would be the work of the messenger. The one God will send will do this work of restoration and reinstatement. It is with that strange blend of anticipation and uneasiness that God's people look to the messengers of every age who call us away from the easiness of life back to the challenge of living as God's faithful people. The work of cleaning and purifying continues in this Advent season. We know that we are not the people God calls us to be. We know that. We know our failures. We know the number of times we could have been helpful, but we weren't. We know that we have not practiced the love that Jesus taught us. We know that we have placed our hands deeply into our pockets and divert our eyes when we walk by the red kettle of the Salvation Army. We know that we have ignored the person asking for help. We know that we have been silent in the face of injustice when we should have spoken. We know that we have looked the other way when cruelty and unkindness were the order of the day. We know that we are no better than the people of Malachi's day. We know that we have not offered true and acceptable worship. We have not presented authentic offerings of righteousness and honesty. And that is why this Advent season comes to us as a season of grace. These Advent days are a time not unlike the season of Lent, which was Advent's inspiration. These days are a time when we can reclaim our identity as God's faithful and authentic people. These Advent days are a gift of grace that allows us to examine ourselves, to ask deep, probing, and usually uncomfortable questions of ourselves. Are we the people we profess to be? Are we the people God calls us to be? Are we living as God calls us to live? Or to put it another way, are we the people who pray, Lord, help me be the person my dog thinks I am? Advent is a season of grace. A time of recovering that calling of God on our lives, a period of a few intense weeks when we can examine who we are and how we live and compare that to who God says we are and how we are to live. Advent is a time when we can discover or maybe rediscover the value of good questions, especially when we ask them of ourselves. The words of Malachi appear in the signature choral work of George Frederick Handel. In Messiah, there is a recitative sung by a bass. The Lord whom ye seek shall come suddenly to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom you delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. And then an alto or a mezzo-soprano answers with an air, but who may abide the day of his coming? And who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire. And then the full choir bursts forthwith, and he shall purify the sons of Levi, that they may offer to God, to the Lord, an offering in righteousness. The librettist, who some say was Charles Jennings, raises and then answers Malachi's question. It is, of course, magnificent. After the first presentation of Messiah in 1741, Handel wrote to a friend, I should be sorry if I only entertained them. I wished to make them better. The season of Advent is not just a time for entertainment, of getting everything ready for Christmas. It is also a time to ask tough questions, the questions we tend to avoid. Those questions about ourselves that makes us uncomfortable, and maybe so sufficiently uncomfortable that we are willing to make some changes. There is the value of a good question. It makes us better. Let us ask questions that challenge ourselves, and let us find the answers that enable us to live as God's faithful and authentic people, for now and evermore. Amen.